Okay, it's recording now. So thank you, George, for coming back to the channel and discussing a little bit more in depth about the interview that I had with Dr. Mikovits and some new, information and your digestion of this information on the bigger picture of how everything fits together here. So how you doing? Doing all right?
Good. I just wanted to, I wanted to compliment you on getting a 3-hour interview with her because, most people are trying to, fit a time frame and they really don't let the person talk. And I notice if you interrupt too much, you don't get that full flow of information. And I see you've got 37,000 people who've watched it already. It's the best interview of Judy Mikovits by far. Bar none on the internet, and I encourage everybody to go out and watch that. I even got 21,000 views of my 15-minute summary. So I say watch both because I'm selfish. But
Well, that's awesome.
What we're doing right now is going to be good because we're driving, we're digging. The answer, we don't have all the answers.
That's right.
Can you hear me, Paul?
I lost a little bit of your internet connection there. I can hear you. The video just froze.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay. Now it's working now.
Okay.
The way I see it is on these really big interviews, these really important types of interviews where we're talking, to the primary source, it's important to just let them share the information that they have. And then that body of work can be dissected, reviewed, investigated, annotated, and that's where the new knowledge comes from. What I've found on some of these other channels, and they're decent channels that these individuals do their interviews with, they don't let the person just speak and share their body of knowledge for others to interpret later. It's almost like they want to interpret in real time. And this story is so big. You have to let the whole picture be painted before you can make a comment. It's like looking at Da Vinci, let's say, painting an amazing work of art, and then commenting
Mona
as
Lisa
he's actually sketching before he even puts any paint on the canvas. I mean, it's like, so just let the body of work present itself, and then people can comment. And that is the scientific discovery. That's the scientific method. So I appreciate your observation with that, and annotating and adding to the body of knowledge. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I think I made this
go
comment
into
to you right
a
after
little bit
you
more
premiered.
in depth. Yeah.
Yeah, so I made this comment to you about the Vatomatic, the Basomatic, the mouse grinder, if you will, picture from her story, from her presentation that she gave. And basically what she was saying was, they had discovered this thing called an XMRV, which was a retrovirus. Retrovirus use replication transcriptase, and there had only been a couple had been discovered at that time. But there seemed to be this cohort of people that had prostate cancer that had high incidence of this thing. So it's kind of a scientist's tale. She's going through her scientist's tale. And then she thought it was potentially applicable to chronic fatigue syndrome because she sampled these people with chronic fatigue, and there was like 4% in the control group, and it was like 70% or something correlation for chronic fatigue. So she's trying to say, hey, a lot of these vaccines, when they're created from mouse viruses, have this HMRV, this xenotropic murine
XMRV.
retrovirus
Yeah, XR.
in them.
Yeah.
XMRV, excuse me, xenotropic is with an X. XMRV.
Right.
So you don't know what's in there. With the vaccines are pushed out so quickly, and they're kind of done in a shotgun style, you don't know what's in there, and they all go into this vat sort of thing. And so she wasn't necessarily saying that these XMRVs that she had discovered caused chronic fatigue syndrome, but she did say that this approach could lead to things that you don't know about in the batch, if you will, that caused a massive uptake or upregulation of your cytokines and chemokines. These are the signalers in your system. This is when you got your shot for Hep C, exactly. And you all of a sudden you have this wrist injury. You know, so that's what she was saying, and I think that's a big idea that she was saying, and that's the first big idea to get out, is not attack her for, you know, other labs couldn't reproduce this, and, you know, let's all get into an argument about how things are frozen with dry ice and all this, but more the idea of impurities in untested vaccines. I think that's the big idea to get from Dr. Judy.
Mm-hmm. That, you know, she mentioned the word associative instead of causal. So that's an important, you know, people keep on mixing those two words together. Causal means that it's causing something. The other is associative. And she was saying that it was associated and led down a path of discovery where it's questioning the safety of the manufacturing process of these vaccines, which is a data point when you look at it with the larger mosaic, like with Wakefield's information about MMR. So we have here, I see additional data points that questions the safety protocols that are in place for manufacturing of vaccines. It's not that I'm anti-vax, I'm not. But the thing is that there is an incentive, a financial incentive, to not have proper safety protocols in place for vaccines. And when you look at that, the tort law has been written in such a way in the benefit of the manufacturers and not of the end user, where if you're harmed by these vaccines that aren't properly manufactured, you can't sue the manufacturer of the vaccine. You go to a super fund and you get pennies on a dollar relative to the, you know, to the cost of your new developed disease from the vaccine. So you got to look at it, the whole picture, not nit and pick, you know, certain aspects of, like you said, if you're freezing the virus a certain way on a certain day, you know. But I thought that she told her story very well, and it is a data point that fits into a larger mosaic, and that's the important piece here, is that the manufacturing of these vaccines are questionable and that people need to investigate, because what she's saying is starting to put the light bulb on and saying, well, wait a minute here, that explains these peripheral nervous system disorders. That explains some of the spectral disorders that we're seeing. That's explaining some of the gut problems that children are having when they get vaccinated, or, you know, or whatever. So I thought that she was being very brave in saying what she was saying, and it fits into a larger mosaic of other researchers like Wakefield, that is sounding alarm and saying, hey, not every vaccine's bad, but we do have a problem, Houston, and we need to solve the problem and figure out what are some of the details. What are these causal things? We know that there's an association, there's a correlation between some of these things that are happening in the vaccine program, and they're associated with, let's say, PNS, peripheral nervous system disorders. But what are some of the mechanisms? And what's interesting with her is that she was stating that the way they make this in the batch, I mean, you're getting a hodgepodge of stuff. It's not one batch
Right.
is different from another batch, So it's not like, and that's why it's so hard to pinpoint. So repeatability is not there because of the means of manufacturing, the way it's manufactured. If you look at it like making a cake, all right, and you're just throwing randomly ingredients, all right, sometimes the cake will turn out really good and sometimes it's really bad, but you can't reproduce it because you don't know exactly the amount of each of the ingredients at what temperature and how many times you mixed it in the blender before you put it in the oven. So that's what's going on here. There's a lot of randomness in the manufacturing process.
And she was pretty clear about that in her book. And I'm about halfway through her book, Plague, the first book, the 2010 book. And she was pretty adamant that these protocols were what was causing the lack of reproducibility, that you couldn't freeze the blood because the XMRVs would degrade quickly. And she lined all this stuff out, but people want to go on vacation and they want to go on for their weekend trip. And so they freeze it. And then, so I'm not here to relitigate that XMRV thing, but I am here to take away the bigger message, like you just stated, Paul, is that these are rush to vaccine. These rush to shotgun. We're literally under the shotgun, and it's a shotgun method to come up with the vaccines, and everyone's the guinea pig on these things. This latest guy, Slaoui, I don't know if you're familiar with the new drug czar that Trump named, this guy named Slaoui, but he's this Iranian/Moroccan guy. He's been at GlaxoSmithKline for 30 years doing vaccines. And he's been pushing this whole CEPI and this whole, here's our drug platform at GSK. And I mean, it looks like it goes right out of the aerosolizer weapons chamber at Fort Detrick. And it goes right over to GlaxoSmithKline in Rockville. I mean, the results get walked over practically. It's the virus vaccine game. He's a big NATO guy. He's from the University of Mons in France. That's right where NATO headquarters is, the Supreme Allied headquarters is. I've been there. I've did some NATO stuff there, research. So, and then he goes to Brussels, which is the head of the UN and EU. He's literally a cultured military brat, medical military brat for his whole life. And so he is the perfect guy to write the blueprint for the WHO, along with a guy named Sina Bavari from Fort Detrick, a good friend of his, and this Virginia Benassi, to say, hey, let's take the 77 different things that the CDC says doesn't have a cure or a vaccine. Let's pick 13. Let's go CRISPR them. Let's go do vaccines, and we'll just release these one at a time. And he himself says, we make 6% on therapeutics. We make 17% on vaccines. So vaccines are a growth business. And he's right in the middle of all these things, given the warning of pandemics and so forth about Ebola and Zika and, every one of the flu and MERS, SARS. It just seems so, the deck is so stacked here. It seems so staged, I guess.
What's interesting is just recently there was, I think it was this morning, that a news announcement came out about Moderna having some positive results with their vaccine program. This is the messenger RNA platform, and that the Dow rallied, at least in the futures market. I don't know where it is right now, but around 900 points. So, so we're going to probably have a rally because of the Moderna news. So with that said, what do you think is going to be happening with this whole messenger RNA platform? Trump.
Oh yeah.
I get it. We just heard in the news that Trump is prophylactically using hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Is he taking Z-Pak too, or no? They're just you giving him hydroxychloroquine.
I think HCQ is the only thing he's taken, but
Okay.
Slaoui, the new czar, is on the board at Moderna, and Gates Foundation is into Moderna for about 80 million or something. Gates Foundation is just the rinse for this group of military guys in NATO and the U.S. To invest in stuff like this. It's easy to predict a black swan event when you're the guy who's pulling the trigger. That's why they all
see,
talk
this is
about.
the straight. Exactly. So, think about it. You have so many companies out there that are trying to develop a vaccine, but it just so happens that Moderna is the one that gets it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody
it's
agrees.
like
Everybody agrees even before they've seen. And Slaoui has seen the test results before he walks up there and gets introduced as the new drug czar. He goes, "Oh, by the way, I just want to tell you, Moderna's doing great." Okay, well, that's because you're on the board. And this is where I think your angle of Wall Street is so valuable, because you understand how valuations work and how releasing insider information works and all that, and model all that versus a true chaos event, and how things don't line up perfectly in the real world if it's not an orchestrated event. Know that because that's your that's one of your PhD theses. So I don't want to take that away from you, but that's what you have to look at this from. You have to look at it from a lot of angles: the financial incentives, just the control, the world control. Now we're in medical martial law. Now the same drone that could be surveilling you is the same drone that's spraying you. It's colorless and odorless. Yeah, it is. I mean, people think, oh, you're making this up. No, look at Operation Ranch Hand in Vietnam. There was a whole rainbow of colors, not just Agent Orange that we sprayed on those people. And everything from the battlefield comes back as a DHS program. So
just anecdotally, I had a friend that her father was one of the chemical mixers in Vietnam for Agent Orange, and she happened to have cleft lip because of it.
Oh, wow.
And they had to go through all the surgeries, the facial surgeries to close it up and all that. And and she she was scarred for life, and people would tease her and not understand what really it was, and I really felt bad for her. But yeah, I mean, and people don't realize that this stuff can get into your germline and pass it on to future generations. And this is how she, it was passed on to her, through her development, as an embryo. It just, the whole body didn't close correctly, and she had the cleft lip. But
yeah, I used to remember all that genesis from the womb and all that from studying it 30 years ago, but I don't remember it anymore. But I do know that the pH imbalances and so forth, as well as on misfolded proteins and all that, can cause these problems. Just reading the book, I really, it's $2 on Kindle if you go get it for Plague, and it's so good for talking about signatures and how the mind of a medical researcher works. Like you were saying, these viruses change your genome forever. It's postulated at 8% of your genome, human genome, is the result of viruses over the billions of years, or however long, millions of years since apes to human. So especially these the leukocytes, the chemical messengers, the B cells and T cells and the cytokines and so forth, but especially the B cells and T cells, if they are infected with something that's a temporal thing like these XRVs, or whatever it is, whatever the virus is, it's sitting there in homeostasis and it's not necessarily inflamed.
right.
And then if you see this big up regulation of one of those and a down regulation of another one, that's a signature. If there's upregulation of B's and upregulation of T's, that's another signature, and so forth. And so that's what she was looking for when she saw the chronic fatigue thing. And then she also saw this upregulation of cortisol, the stress hormone, which also activates, your production of antibodies. And that's not what you want with a vaccine. You don't want to cause a runaway cytokine storm, making thousands and thousands cytokines and throwing your body.
This is really important because from her, from her discussion, it's the realization that when we are putting these vaccines in, or we do have chronic inflammation because of just our diet and the way we live in America, that we are setting in motion, reactivating those viruses, all right, in our body that have been dormant for a while. We get some new stuff through another vaccine, and it creates another inflammatory response, and then it releases a whole new wave of them. That's one take that I got from it. But another take was, and it's not what she mentioned, but it dovetails into what I've been saying all along, that with this SARS-CoV-2 virus, we have clinical presentations because of the non-ARDS that it's a blood disease and that it's infecting T cells and red blood cells. Well, the red blood cells die off and just shed through the body. But you do have, like you said, memory T cells, memory B cells. Well, what happens when they go in G0 and they stay dormant? So if we have SARS-CoV-2 that is in dormancy, and then all of a sudden it's reactivated by, let's say, a vaccine, is that the second wave?
Right.
Is that
right.
is this that chronic illness that I call AIDS-like syndrome? We don't know what this means long term in terms of oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes. So this is why I keep on saying that, there's two. I'm not so worried about the first wave. I'm more worried about what's that second wave look like. And there's a lot of different ways to spin second wave, either at a chronic situation or just a normal reinfection as it's, going through the population. I'm real concerned about this, what I call this AIDS-like syndrome, that potentiality. I'm not saying it's there. I'm just saying that there is a potentialness for it because it is infecting the immune system. And the last time we heard about viruses, especially with glycoprotein 120, that was HIV-1. So it's not that far stretch of a hypothesis to say that there is the potential for chronic illness that leads to an AIDS-like syndrome. We'll have a different name for it, but it's her data, her observations, her experiences, how she articulated the argument during the interview and on other interviews gives us a piece of that mosaic that vaccines, a lot of them are not safe. It's the way they're manufactured, and that they create these storms in the body that exacerbate things, either other viral infections or, chronic illnesses that are central nervous system or peripheral nervous system disorders.
Yeah, you remind me when you say glycoprotein 120, of course, coming from HIV, that we're establishing a layman's vocabulary here. You're obviously going to med school and finishing up in your master's at Harvard in biochem, which has got to be tough. But what we're establishing, what you're helping people establish is sort of like the vocabulary of all this. Because I remember her in the book, she's dealing with glycoprotein 70. And she's also dealing with the GAG proteins. These GAG, I always think of it like a gaggle.
The gag protein, right?
Yeah, they're rounding up a gaggle of inserts, like the 4 HIV inserts, to basically round them up so they can be transcribed. And she's got one of the markers was the GAG protein for this XMRV that she found. So a lot of these things like the envelope protein, she's talking about all these same things in the virus, the capsid protein and also that we're talking about right now. And what struck me so much was when you talked about anemia, right when the first time you mentioned anemia, I thought of Fort Detrick, and I thought of them getting all these the Nazi medicine chest, the whole Nazi cookbook of all their bioweapons. And the two biggest ones, the two biggest, personal pet projects. One was from Kurt Blom on equine anemia. Equine anemia is horse anemia. And then the other one was a guy named Eric Traub, Traub, for encephalomyelitis. So it's infecting the CNF fluid and those sort of things. And they were weaponizing and aerosolizing those at Fort Detrick. So the next question I got for Dr. Judy is, hey, are you aware of the whole Operation Ranch Hand and trying to aerosolize all these things from the Nazi medicine cabinet that we brought? Plus, we brought a lot of stuff from the Imperial Japanese program as well, trying to aerosolize that stuff. That's more the prions and kuru and mad cow and stuff. So if I'm having to look, I'm not a scientist, right? So I don't have the skill to look across 500 diseases, but I just look and see what's the favorite disease of the guy who designed the program. And if you put that over into mice and you infected the blood to cause a leukemia, she was saying how this leukemia virus was so closely related to the retrovirus, very closely related, like only 2% dissimilarity, that this could be causing the chronic fatigue, anemia, as well as sort of what we're seeing in SARS-CoV-2 by looking at the roots of the program. So I wanted to start asking her if she knew all these people like Sina Bavari and Slawi and all these people that have consulted with Fort Detrick. That'll be for our next interview of her.
What was interesting is that over the weekend I had to do a case study I was telling you about. And the case study in medical school was dealing with SARS-CoV-2.
Oh, really?
So COVID-19. And it was talking about the administration of antibiotics with antivirals and why people start getting weaker. So a lot of people don't realize that when they're giving the antibiotics on top of the antivirals, it's not to kill the viral infection, it's to kill the body gets out of homeostasis because it's infected. So bad bacteria starts to grow and you have to kill that off. All right. So you have to give them antibiotics. This is part of the reason why Z-Pak works with hydroxychloroquine. All right. So it allows you to get back to homeostasis. So, but people don't realize that on eukaryotic cells, our cells, on our cells, the antibiotics do not attack the proteins. We have glycoproteins we have lots of different types. We have glycolipids and glycoproteins all over our cells. Well, on the surface of those cells, the antibiotics will not attack our plasma membrane glycolipids or glycoproteins. It will attack prokaryotes. All right, so the bacteria ones. Well, these drugs, they do get into the cytosol of the cell and attack the mitochondria, because the mitochondria are ancient prokaryotes. So the surface of these mitochondria do have the glycoprotein and glycolipid-like structures that some antibiotics will attack. So your ATP creation starts to go down because they're attacking the antibiotics are attacking the mitochondria in our cells. So you have this, you're trying to kill the virus, but you need the ATP to be able to fight the virus, with your immune system. But the antibiotics are bringing down the ATP. So it's this balancing act that doctors have to go through. But it was interesting to understand that pathway that a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, in the book Plague, it mentions this with the mitochondria oxygen usage, because if you have a low oxygen usage, you're not synthesizing ATP.
Right.
How you're respirating oxygen. So that was interesting. Right. It's mentioned as a flag also for her when she was talking about chronic fatigue syndrome. And here's, I guess, the thing that I really want to discourage people from doing is, this person was put in jail illegally. She was trying to shepherd what she felt was her responsibility for federally funded research for archival purposes. You can't just throw that away and destroy it. She spent 5 or 6 days in jail against her will. If you've never been put in jail for writing a great story, you don't know how that feels. But let me tell you, it feels really shitty to be put in jail for being a great reporter. And so, this person's not doing it for the money. This person's been completely destroyed. Bankruptcy. You could just tell from the book and the way it's written, even though that Hicken Lively writes the book kind of as her ghost author or her co-author. It's from her. She's caring about the patients. She really was. You could tell she's happiest when she's meeting with the moms and dads of these patients. And so I really have to, that's how I judge people, is what is your motivation? Not necessarily your decisions, because people make mistakes. But should she have taken the notebooks or not taken the notebooks? I don't know if she's ever thought about this, but the Whittemores, that ran this Peterson Foundation, they were awfully close to Harry Reid. One of their kids birthed all their babies. All the Reid kids was a doctor and so forth. And there was a lot of testing done in Nevada. The Navy here, when the Navy can't shoot off big enough rockets at Dahlgren behind me in Virginia at the Navy Warfare Center, they shoot them off at China Lake in California and Nevada. There's a couple of test ranges they have out there. And the Whittemores had this 40,000 acre test range for firing things off. And they're constantly at Fort Detrick, when they can't do it in a small area like spraying some cattle or spraying some pigs in the Midwest, they're going out west and spraying cattle. Because the whole idea was, hey, we want to attack the Vietnamese, the cow. The cow was the backbone of the Vietnamese army, right? Because the villagers depended on their cow or their ox, right? So they were spraying this stuff all over. And the Whittemores just become fantastically wealthy. And if you look at how the outbreaks were of chronic fatigue syndrome, I had a relative living there in Lake Tahoe, and I remember this happening. I remember going there and helping her build a roof on her house. It would go 40 miles, and then it would be 40 miles again over here, and then 40 miles again over here in 2-year segments. And I go, man, that's spraying. They're testing over here, and then they don't want to test in the same place because everybody's going to die of cancer for the second round. So they move it down the road 40 miles. A lot of times there's a consolidation of the ranch lands after the ranchers die, right? So was she unwittingly drawn into a weapons program and didn't even know it? Something that was causing chronic fatigue syndrome, like an equine anemia or an equine encephalomyelitis. And they needed somebody to float this idea out there of, hey, we need research in this area. We want to help develop this, but we don't want to pay for it. I don't know, but I just see this connection when somebody becomes a billionaire automatically, and they get a 40,000. They're heavily connected to Harry Reid, who's on the biologic warfare committee, and then they have this 40,000 acre thing that they say they're going to develop into a Jack Nicklaus set of golf courses, and Jack Nicklaus builds one little green on one little corner, and then the rest is constantly being strafed by C-130s and every other damn thing that the Air Force makes, and these clouds. You just wonder. I mean, has that thought gone through her mind that the Whittemores were doing testing, and inadvertently their daughter had been? It's a horrible, tragic story. Their daughter had this chronic fatigue, and like the guy Harry Whittemore or Harvey Whittemore says, I don't care how much money you have. If your daughter's in a wheelchair and can't go to the prom, I'll do anything I can. So it just seems like one of those, it has to have state support. There must have been something going on there. Harry Reid is so tied in with organized crime, in Las Vegas and Reno. I just wonder, if she had given that any thought.
And you know what, and this is tangential. It doesn't really relate to Mikovits, but Harry Reid stated when Trump was, transitioning into the presidency, when he was elected, but he wasn't actually sworn in yet. He was basically stating the agencies, the intelligence agencies, shouldn't be telling Trump truthful information. It's like, well, wait a minute, he's going to be the president of the United States. Why would a senator, because at that time he was still senator before he retired, but
right.
Why would a senator be saying something like this unless he is, like you said, doing nefarious things behind the scenes? If you're trying to hide something, you would try to prevent the powers that have the information from sharing it with people that may be investigating, Harry Reid.
Well, the CIA, goes back to testing, and the Atomic Energy Commission goes back to doing atomic testing, going back to Howard Hughes in Nevada. So that's nothing new. And then, of course, Yucca Mountain was going to be the place where they stored all the stuff. So he took the money.
He took the money.
Yeah.
But never put the nuclear waste there.
Out of consideration for the people, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
right.
meanwhile, the Reed Ranch kept getting bigger and bigger. I just wonder about these things where it's always, geez, I'm a billionaire. I have enough money to build out my dream golf course on this 40,000 acres, but you know what? I'm going to let the Air Force run over it again and over it again for another 10 years to do their spray testing. And if you look how chronic fatigue moved around, it was just like they were moving around because, like on a golf course, you have a golf hole that too many people have spiked, so they move it the hole on the next day. And maybe that's a good analogy for the Jack, because there is a Jack Nicklaus green there, and it's in the middle of this huge test range, and they never developed it. So you just wonder if she's ever thought about that. I want to ask her about that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That is funny. But there's a lot to digest from what she provided at a scientific level and at more of a political level, a policy level. But what I would love to do, and I don't know how to get his contact information. Maybe you do. I don't know. Wakefield. He's the next guy to start talking to. And he's the one, for individuals that don't know who he is, he's the one that kind of blew the lid off of the MMR vaccine program and how it was a associative study, again, not causal, associative study that was, showing potentiality of digestive issues, and that eventually, leads to autism. But there's a story there. There's a larger story there. And then when you couple that with Moderna and forced vaccine program, everyone putting their eggs into the whole, we're going to have a cure through a vaccine through Moderna. But it's important to show that, well, wait a minute here. Let's slow down. Why Moderna? What's the testing, the proper testing? Is there a third party validating what's in the bottle before you start doing these vaccines? Another company, I can't remember the name of it, maybe you know it, they've been awarded a contract by the administration for doing the mass syringes, and they're going to be up and running with production in October, and that came out about 3 days before the whole Moderna news. So they're already setting in motion here.
Yeah. This is like the D-Day invasion.
Is.
Yeah, this is like the D-Day invasion, only more scripted, where it's you have a little more time to think between steps, but it's very scripted. This is very military plan kind of lockstep that it's kind of proceeding in. That's why I like people like Judy Mikovits. She's a person who, as far as Wakefield, if you tell me his first name, I can try.
I'll look into his first name. I don't know.
I have a lot of CNN monkeys, flying monkeys, that will, go lie send a whole bunch of things to somebody before I talk to them. So that's why I usually interview people last, because they've heard all these horrible things about me. And then I do an interview with them, and I watch all the previous interviews, and I read their book. What a concept, right? Before you interview them.
Right.
And they go, oh, wow, you're not like they say at all. You're a really good guy. You helped me sell a whole bunch of books, as a matter of fact, as soon as, and not for the wrong reason, for the right reason, because everyone who says, oh, hey, that has applicability. Everyone should go get Plague for $2 just for the indexing and searching. You could search on XMRV or search on any kind of, just how she does signatures, it's worth it. Just how her thought process in going through and saying why she thought chronic fatigue syndrome might be these retroviruses. It's not like she was totally discredited with the slam that they did on her. There was 2 recombinant sections of the 8K that makes up the XMRV. There was 2 4K recombinant mouse sections, or precursors, or whatever you want to call them. And they were all sequenced, and there was a consensus sequence. So to hear people tell it, and people love to use the word grifter now. That's the new thing. She's an XMRV grifter. She's trying to get money. $2? Really? Is she making that much money after she had her life ruined? $2? And like, these guys are printing trillions for themselves, right? And we're worried about $2 for Judy Mikovits. But a lot of the things she said were confirmed. A lot of the sequencing was confirmed. And I do believe that we need to go back and look at the protocols and how the experiments were conducted. But moving on to other topics, I really do think that there's this aerosolized thread here, taking the Nazi war chest or the medicine cabinet, or whatever you want to call it, all their dark weapons, and trying to aerosolize them because you have limited impact if it's human to human contact. You have to buy a lot of people lap dances in brothels, if you want to.
Well, to your point, I think as they were learning about HIV-1, I'm starting to come to the conclusion, or at least with the working hypothesis, that they wanted to turn this weapon program with this SARS-CoV-2 into an aerosol version of HIV.
Right.
But it's just a working hypothesis, and working hypotheses can die off very quickly, with new data. But I'll tell you that when you look at the key players involved, they were all HIV researchers. Yep. When you start looking at the genome of SARS-CoV-2, we are seeing, HIV homologies in it. When you start looking at the clinical presentation, when it's involving the blood disease, that, screams to me HIV. So I'm willing to bet that as people start diving in more into the research and more into the genome, they're going to say, oh, you look in this area too, there's homology here, and look in this area, there's homology here, and that's why it's so important that everybody, has something to contribute here. It's not just a few people. This is a team effort, a very large team effort. But there's definitely something afoot, and there are people that are hiding, that are unfortunately in power, making decisions, and we need to call them off on it. And hopefully there is an awareness that is raised in Congress, where they start investigating. Because I'll tell you what, I am very concerned about this forced vaccine program, especially when you listen to Judy and saying, well, wait a minute here, the way they make these things are bad. And then when you're given the vaccine, it can create a storm that wakens up all these dormant things that they've been pumping into us. So, this is just another piece, another data point to just say, you know what, I don't feel confident in the vaccine program in terms of the way it's manufactured. And people need to really start talking about this, especially when we walk down, especially when we start walking down this road of testing for antibodies. And if you don't have the right antibody, are you force vaccinated or not? I've heard, I don't know if it's true or not. Did HR 6666 get passed?
No, not yet. Well,
Not yet?
I might have to take a break.
You're all right.
I got something in my windpipe. I think it's an XMRV.
All right.
Or not. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all right. Okay,
no,
so
we just cut that part out. But I'm better now. I'm sorry.
All right.
Sometimes you get tickle in your throat or whatever. So we can edit this, right? So I do want to say that there's a question about the safety, and you're right. This thing with Gates and the 450,000 kids in India is just really crazy, and he got kicked out of India and all that. And Gates is pushing Moderna. This Sloughy, this new guy, is on the board on Moderna. I'm following the Singapore health surveillance network. There's this NATO courier I'm following, and she's with Singapore Statistics, and there's another NATO courier, and they're all at the Wuhan Games in October. And then the person who writes the WHO playbook, if you will, the R&D playbook, the thing that Sloughy says we need to focus on these 13 new novel viruses. That's the gal named Virginia Benassi, and then Sina Bavari, his friend, is writing that book. So it's basically telegraphing what vaccines are going to be needed, because we know what black swan events are going to happen. We know how it's going to be passed around. And I don't know how they're rationalizing this and spreading this, but it seems like they have a rationale that, hey, if we take the list of 77 agents, maybe I'm getting hit with one of them right now, spray. But if we go down the list and expose an attenuated version of each one at some military game every year, and then the public goes through the exercise of doing all the safe distancing, and we develop the vaccine, we'll just go through all the top 13, and it'll be 13. I mean, this Sloughy still works for GlaxoSmithKline. It'll be 13 vaccines for us. They actually want 30 shots. This group, this CEPI, this preparedness group that at World Health Organization, they want 30 shots. So you can see where they're going is, hey,
do they want to administer these 30 shots in one sitting?
No. 30 shots over time, I believe.
Over time.
It'll be interesting to see what they end up recommending, 5 at once or whatever. But like you said, the interactivity between these things is completely unpredictable. So it's a whole new
So what they're going to do, see, if you think about it, what they're doing to children with the accelerated scheduling is what they're trying to do to adults. Because with adults, we don't have like these massive amounts of injections of vaccines. Maybe you get 1 or 2, maybe, but not 10 in one sitting or 5 in one sitting. So that would be rare unless you're, let's say, traveling to, a distant land somewhere. But this is crazy. This is crazy when they want to pump our bodies as adults, with all these vaccines that have no testing of the synergistic effects. This is why I don't understand that. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist. I don't understand why people just don't rise up and say, we're not going down this road.
But see, they're not gonna let you go eat at a restaurant or go to work or meet at a baseball game unless you have this, connector or your quantum dot or your chip or whatever saying you're okay and you've had your latest shots. I mean, it's really almost like we've been turned into cattle. I mean, we're not going to be working unless you do software like we do in a way. And so you're just kind of cattle till you're ready for slaughter, it seems. I mean, that seems to be the program. Getting people back to work does not appear to be the priority. when I heard that they want to do 30 of these different vaccines, it's just it's like a guaranteed make work for GlaxoSmithKline. And I heard him speak. I heard this Slaoui speak in 2016. He's the biggest fan of Biden. Biden's his biggest person. So supporter. I just don't get it. It just, I don't know why Trump would name him. But anyway, I'm going to have to cut it short. We're having some work
no
done here at the house, and we'll pick it up. I would like to interview Dr. Judy with you, Paul, and just let her watch.
It's very hard. It's very hard to get on her schedule. It takes almost 3 weeks to get on her schedule. I mean, she's that booked up.
Yeah.
But,
well,
we could try.
We're not the average interviewer either. We're much more in depth. And we're smarter. So we're going to have a better interview. So she's not going to have to do all those other ones. So I've got 100,000 subscribers. You've got 50. So,
right.
It'll
we'll
be
try.
good. Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thanks,
Talk
Paul.
to you later. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.